I recently graduated college and still live with my parents, but I'm completely self-sufficient with my own job. My father has always been controlling, especially with money. Even though we were well off, he'd use money to keep everyone in line. When I started making my own money and didn't need to rely on him anymore, things got tense. Everything exploded 2 months ago. My father got into an argument with my mom and hit her. She gave him the silent treatment for 2 weeks, which made him even angrier. Then one day he tried to get physical with me. When my younger sister tried to step between us, he shoved her and hurt her shoulder. My mom tried to help and got her nose broken in the process. I told him I was calling the police right then and there. He tried to intimidate me, saying I wouldn't dare call the cops on my own father. I simply told him to watch me do exactly that. The police came and gave him a temporary restraining order. My mom, who's been a stay-at-home mom her whole life, was scared to divorce him because she had no income of her own. She tried to suggest family counseling instead. My father tried to negotiate, saying he would go to counseling if we dropped the restraining order. My mom insisted we needed the space right now and that counseling had to come first. He responded by threatening that we would get nothing from him. Here's where things get interesting. My sister and I each had about $150,000 saved for college. Half was in accounts in our names that our parents could access, and half was in our grandparents' names in America. The day of the first court hearing, I tried to transfer my account fully into my name because I didn't trust my father. But I was too late. He had already moved almost all the money into his pension plan. When I confronted him about where my money was, he acted like he didn't know what I was talking about. He claimed it was always his money and he had just let me think it was mine. When I told him he couldn't do this because it was literally my college fund and savings from my own work, he smugly told me to sue him if I didn't like it. So I did exactly that. I got a lawyer. Turns out my father had also taken money from my sister's account. My grandparents sided with my father and cut us all off, which meant the money in America was gone too. But I had something better: evidence. My lawyer made a list of everything we could use against my father: the assault, past incidents, statements from my teachers and therapist. We gave him a choice: pay me $50,000 and drop his false claims about me hitting him, or we'd take him to court for everything. His lawyer tried to negotiate, suggesting we consider a payment plan for a smaller amount. My lawyer was firm, stating it would be $50,000 by the deadline or we'd proceed with all charges. When his lawyer claimed they had evidence of assault against me as well, my lawyer coolly responded that we'd see how that held up in court alongside our police reports and witness statements. The night before the deadline, he caved. He had to use the money from my grandparents' account to pay me back since his pension was locked. So the money they were keeping from me ended up coming back to me anyway. My father tried to save face by claiming he was only agreeing to this because he wanted peace in the family. I called him out, telling him he was agreeing because he knew he'd lose in court. He tried to threaten that they could have pressed charges against me too, but I shut that down by pointing out that we both knew who was telling the truth here. Since he put my original money in his pension plan and my parents are still married, my mom gets 50% of that in the divorce. So he essentially paid me back double what he took. My grandparents still won't speak to me, claiming I destroyed the family. But I didn't destroy anything. I just refused to let them steal from me and get away with it. The funny thing is, if they hadn't sided with him and cut me off, he wouldn't have had to use their money to pay me back. They played themselves. My father still sends messages through other family members about how ungrateful I am and how I'll regret this someday. The only thing I regret is not standing up to him sooner. Sure, dealing with all this has been exhausting and I've had to increase my therapy sessions, but it was worth it to finally show him he couldn't control me with money anymore. I've been living in this neighborhood for almost 7 years now. I bought this house after my divorce, wanting a fresh start in a peaceful community. It's a modest 2-bedroom home, perfect for me and my dog, with a single-car garage that I converted into a home office since I work remotely as a software developer. Everything was great until my next-door neighbors moved in about 3 years ago. They're a couple in their 50s with their 2 adult children, And from day one, they made it clear they weren't interested in being friendly neighbors. The first red flag appeared when they started accumulating cars. Not one or two extra vehicles. We're talking about 9 cars in total. 9. And here's where the real problem began. Our street has plenty of parking space, but there's a city regulation that clearly states you can't leave your car parked in the same spot for more than 48 hours. It's a reasonable rule that keeps the neighborhood looking neat and prevents people from using the street as their personal parking lot. One day, I was working in my home office when I heard engines running outside. Looking through my window, I saw them carefully orchestrating their parking strategy. That's when I decided to talk to them. I walked outside and politely pointed out that they were parking 2 cars in front of my house. The woman simply asked if that was a problem. When I explained that I occasionally had visitors and would like to have space in front of my house for them to park, she dismissively told me that the street was public property and they could park wherever they wanted. I tried reasoning with them, mentioning their large empty driveway that could fit 4 cars. That's when her husband jumped in, stating they don't put cars in their driveway because it looks tacky. When I pointed out the irony of 9 cars scattered around the street looking any better, the woman became hostile. She boasted about how much money they paid for their house and told me that if I didn't like their choices, I could move. I was stunned by their entitled attitude. What made it worse was that over half of these cars were barely used. They were essentially parking space placeholders. They would rotate the cars every 47 hours, just before the 48-hour limit, to comply with the regulation technically, while violating its spirit. I tried talking to other neighbors about it, and many shared my frustration, but didn't want to create conflict. I considered reporting the parking situation to the city, but they weren't technically breaking any rules with their rotation system. Then in 2021, I noticed construction starting behind their main house. Being in my home office, I had a clear view of everything. The speed at which they built the second unit was suspicious. It was completed in less than a month. Anyone who's dealt with construction knows that between permits, inspections, and actual building time, it should take at least 2 to 3 months. I decided to ask them about the permits for their new construction. The woman immediately got defensive, telling me to mind my own business and claiming they knew what they were doing. When I mentioned that the construction seemed unusually fast, their son jumped in, accusing me of spying on their house and telling me to focus on my own property. That was the last straw. I submitted a report to the city through their app detailing my concerns about potentially illegal construction without proper permits. I didn't hear anything back, and honestly, I almost forgot about it until last week. I was working when I heard the sound of demolition. Looking out my window, I saw them tearing down their second unit. A city inspector was supervising the whole process, clipboard in hand. Later that day, while getting my mail, I ran into another neighbor. They excitedly asked if I'd heard about what happened. When I confirmed I knew about the unit being torn down, they filled me in on the details. The city had discovered the illegal construction and ordered its demolition. According to neighborhood gossip, the family was complaining about losing over $100,000 in materials and labor. The next day, I was in my front yard when they confronted me. The woman accused me of reporting them to the city. I stood my ground, explaining that I had reported suspicious construction activity and that if they had proper permits, they wouldn't have had any problems. Her husband then threatened to sue me. I shut that down quickly by pointing out that any court would be very interested in hearing about how they deliberately circumvented building codes and safety regulations. They stormed off, but the very next day, all their cars disappeared from the street. Turns out the city inspector had noticed their parking scheme and warned them about potential fines for abusing parking regulations. Now their precious driveway is full of cars, exactly how they didn't want it. I heard through another neighbor that they're trying to sell their house now. Apparently, the financial hit from the illegal unit, combined with their damaged reputation in the neighborhood, was too much for them to handle. I have been in the automotive locksmith business for over 2 decades now. Started right after high school when my uncle took me under his wing at his shop. He taught me everything about locks, keys, and the mechanics behind them. After he retired, I took over the business and built solid relationships with local banks and repo companies. One regular part of my job was making rounds to storage lots where banks kept their repossessed vehicles. Usually, I'd get a list of cars needing new locks or keys, and I'd tackle them all in one go. It was straightforward work: pick the locks, replace what needed replacing, make new keys, and move on to the next one. This story started with a maroon Ford Tempo at one of the bank lots. Nothing special about it, just another repo job. I did what I always do: picked the ignition, replaced the lock cylinder, and made new keys for everything. Simple job, in and out, then sent the bill to the bank like usual. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from a bank representative. He asked if I could do him a favor regarding the Ford Tempo job. When I asked what the problem was, he explained that the owner was causing a huge headache by refusing to pay and claiming damages. I asked about the nature of the damages, mentioning that sometimes people get confused when their old keys don't work with a new ignition, even though we always provide 2 new keys. That's when the bank rep told me something that made me laugh. The owner was claiming I had broken his rear window defroster. I told him that was ridiculous, explaining that making keys had absolutely nothing to do with the rear defroster, and it was physically impossible. The bank rep admitted he knew this, but said his boss was tired of hearing this guy scream about it, as he'd been relentless. I told him not to worry about the $75, reminding him that they gave us plenty of business, then suggested he send the owner over so I could take care of it. The bank rep was relieved, but I was fuming inside. A few days later, the owner showed up at my shop. The smug look on his face made my blood boil. I handed him the check for $75 while pointing out that we both knew making keys couldn't have damaged his defroster. His response made me even angrier. He smirked and said the bank didn't know that. He walked out and I stood there grinding my teeth. The nerve of this guy, openly admitting to his scam. I wanted to do something about it, but what could I do? It was just $75, and I had to maintain my relationship with the bank. Months passed, and I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Then one Friday night, while picking up my usual takeout from my favorite restaurant, I noticed something interesting. 3 doors down, a new restaurant was opening. And guess who was plastered all over the promotional banners and signs? Mr. Defroster himself. I went to check out his restaurant the following week with my ex. The food was mediocre at best, nowhere near as good as my regular place. That's when I knew exactly how to get my revenge. Every Friday night, I'd station myself near his restaurant. When I saw people heading in, I'd casually approach them and suggest trying the place 3 doors down, telling them it had much better quality food for the same price range. I didn't just limit myself to Friday nights. Since I was often in the shopping center for various errands, office supplies, taking my kids to karate lessons, I made it my mission to spread the word about how mediocre his food was compared to the other restaurants. I wasn't even lying, his food really was subpar, and people deserved to know they could get better meals elsewhere. I kept this up for months, then years. I watched as his customer base dwindled, as fewer and fewer cars filled his parking lot. 2.5 years later, the for lease sign went up where his restaurant used to be. I did some rough math based on the average restaurant's revenue. He must have lost tens of thousands of dollars. All because he tried to scam me out of $75. A few months after his restaurant closed, I ran into him at a gas station. He looked defeated, nothing like the smug guy who'd walked into my shop years ago. I couldn't resist approaching him, asking if he remembered me, the locksmith he scammed over a defroster, and how the restaurant business was treating him. He just stared at me for a moment before his eyes widened with recognition. When he finally spoke, his voice was shaky as he asked if I was the one telling people not to eat at his restaurant. I simply told him that I was just telling people where they could get better food, and that while the bank might not have known about the defroster, the customers sure knew about the quality of his food. Then I drove off, leaving him standing there with his mouth open. I'm a developer who switched jobs about 8 months ago after my previous company downsized. The new position seemed perfect: better pay, shorter commute, and what appeared to be a more relaxed environment. The manager who hired me came across as laid back and understanding during the interview. Everything started normally enough. The work was challenging but manageable, and my co-workers were friendly. Then 3 months into my employment, our boss called an emergency team meeting one Friday afternoon. During the meeting, our boss announced that he'd been thinking about team morale and building stronger bonds between everyone. He then declared he was implementing a mandatory team building savings fund. When I asked him to clarify what that meant, he cheerfully explained that they would deduct 5% from everyone's monthly paycheck, with the company matching 50% of the contributions. He described it as being like a fun little piggy bank for our office family. One of my co-workers raised her hand. Let's call her Karen, since she turned out to be quite the enabler. She enthusiastically supported the idea, gushing about how wonderful it would be to have a surprise fund for office parties and team events. I wasn't convinced, but most people seemed to go along with it. The first month, the deduction appeared on our paychecks under team building initiative. The second month, same thing. By the third month, people started asking questions about what the money was being used for, since we hadn't seen any office improvements or team events. That's when things got weird. I overheard our boss on the phone in his office one day. He was talking to someone about upgrading his reservation to a premium beachfront villa with a private pool. When asked about the cost, he confidently said money wasn't an issue because he had a dedicated fund for this. I immediately shared this information with my closest co-worker. They were shocked and angry, stating that it was our money he was spending. I agreed and suggested we needed to confront him about this. We gathered a few other colleagues and requested a meeting with him. His response was interesting. He tried to explain it away by saying that managing all of us was extremely stressful, and this vacation was essential for his mental health, which he claimed directly impacted the team's performance. He actually tried to justify it as a legitimate use of the team building fund. When I confronted him about how this wasn't what he told us the money was for and demanded our contributions back, he simply said the policy clearly indicated participation was mandatory, referring to some memo he had circulated. My co-worker, who'd been with the company for 5 years, had enough and announced their resignation. That's when our boss revealed that according to his team building initiative guidelines, leaving employees must pay an exit fee of 3 months' worth of contributions to cover the gap in the vacation fund. That's when I lost it. I demanded he show us where we had signed anything agreeing to this. He tried to fall back on his memo excuse, but I cut him off by informing him that I'd already sent everything to the Department of Labor and the state's Wage Theft Division. His face went pale. I then revealed that I'd been recording our conversations since I overheard his vacation booking, noting that our state has one-party consent for recordings. Karen jumped to his defense, crying out that we couldn't do this to him because he worked so hard for us. I ignored her and added that I had copies of all the bank statements showing where our team building money actually went, which the Department of Labor found quite interesting. The next day, 2 investigators showed up at our office. Turns out our boss had collected over $47,000 from employees over the past year through various mandatory initiatives. He'd been doing this long before I joined the company, but previous employees had been too intimidated to speak up. The investigators found that he'd used the money for personal expenses including 3 luxury vacations, a hot tub, and a down payment on a boat, all labeled as team-building expenses in his records. He was fired on the spot by corporate. They were horrified when they discovered what he'd been doing under their nose. Everyone got their money back plus interest. Karen quit in protest of his firing, declaring that we were all ungrateful team members who didn't understand leadership. He had to cancel his upcoming vacation. Non-refundable deposits paid with stolen money get seized as evidence. Last I heard, he's facing criminal charges for wage theft and fraud. We got a new boss last week. First thing she did was eliminate all mandatory deductions and implement a transparent budget for actual team-building activities. Yesterday, she bought us all lunch, with her own corporate card, not our wages. Corporate even gave everyone affected by the scam an extra week of paid vacation as an apology for not catching this sooner. I'm using mine next month to go on my own beach vacation. No team building required.